Hey guys, in our previous video, we created our users table. We created some mechanisms that allow us to at least create the user and find a user with a matching username and password. So what we need to do now is actually start creating our login forms so that we can create a user session and allow authentication across other pages and actually start imposing restrictions on our pages. Now, step one is going to have me create a brand new file, and I'm going to explain what the purpose of this file is. So I'm going to create a new file inside of my includes folder. So I click includes, create new file, and I'm calling this one session.php. Now, in order for us to handle, let's say, to purvey user information across our website, once you have logged in, we have to use what we call a session or a cookie, or there are certain super variables that are there. So a cookie is stored on the person's machine, a session is stored in the server or on the server. So we'll be using sessions, and in order to get the use of sessions in PHP, we have to run a directive, and well, it's really a function, and that function is session_start. All right. So the reason I put it in its own file just for this one line is that we can include this file everywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and include this file on our header.php page. So instead of includes, I just find header.php. And the first thing that should be done on the header.php is include our session.php file. All right, so I did that, and I included some amount of some comments so you know exactly what's happening there. All right, so we have our session.php included on our header file, and once the header is included somewhere, session.php is implied, and we can utilize our session variables across our website. Next, I'm going to make some modifications to this file. Firstly, fix that spelling error. And I'm going to make some modifications to this nav bar where I want a section to the right, and I'll just bring it up. So over here, we want a button that says login. And if the person has logged in, then we want to change it to like a welcome message and a logout button. All right. So I'm going to make that modification here. So in order to accomplish that, we need to modify how the divs look. Admittedly, I didn't find this very easily on the Bootstrap documentation, so I'm just going to do it here. And if you want to go and double check it and you find it, then please show me the page, but I'm going to do it how I know it's done in Bootstrap 4 after much rigor and experimentation. So I'm going to modify this first div class with navbar nav, and I'm going to add another class that says mr-auto. So this is my way of saying I want it to always be on the left-hand side. And then I'm just going to copy and paste that because I need a similar construct, but then this one is going to say ml-auto. All right. And then if I just reload this page very quickly, we're not done. I'm just reloading so you can see. Then we see here that we have our two original links. These are the MR Auto, but then we now have to the right-hand side the same two links because, well, we copied and pasted them. So now we know we have a section to the right and we have a section to the left. And now we can dictate what happens on the right-hand side of our page. All right. So I'm going to remove. Well, instead of removing, I'm just going to modify. So I have the link that says home, but this one I'm going to make it say login. All right, and then I'm going to make it navigate to login.php. So if somebody is not logged in, then they should see the button to the right that says login. And then I can refresh, and then we will see the login button. And if we try to navigate, we're getting an error because that does not exist. So we need to go and create our login button. So I create a new file at the root, and this one is going to be login.php. Now for login.php, it's going to kind of share quite a few things with the other pages. So I'm just going to go to maybe edit, and I'm going to copy the first part of the PHP block, place over here. We change the title, and this is login page, or well, user space login, and we're including the same files, and I don't need any of these queries, so I'll just remove those real quickly. All right, so that's the top of our login page. Now I'm going to expedite this video, and I'm going to just go ahead and create the form, and then we come back and we dissect it together. All right, so I went ahead and created this form pretty quickly, and I'm going to walk you through some of the differences between how this form will behave and how our attendance registration form will behave. So firstly, I'm echoing the title because, I'm just echoing an H1 tag, or the H1 tag with text centered has the echo statement in it for the title. And so our title is being printed at the top, user login. And we also see it here in our title bar. Next, we have our, we have our form with an action that looks entirely different from what we have seen up until this point, but our method is still equal to post. So we'll get back to the action. In this form, I use the table to help with my layout. So I'm using one TD for the username or for the label, and one for the text box. And the value here has quite a bit of text, which I'll get back to. And then I'm putting in some error message. We may or may not use that. Let me take it out for now, to avoid any confusion. I kind of got excited when I did all of that. I'm sorry, but I'll put it back and we can go through it together. And then I'm using another row for the labels and the controls for the password. And then we have our submit button, which is btn primary, btn block, and a little forgot password link. And this is what it renders. All right, so that is what all of that code renders, and this is our new login form. Now, what we need to do is wire it up so that when the person clicks login, it moves to a page, does verification, and then takes an action. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but when you're using a login form, it kind of behaves differently from most other forms. Most other forms move on to another page like we did with our registration and success page. All right. In terms of the login form, it kind of will sit on the same page and show you the same information you just try to enter until you get it right. So that is the reason for this particularly unique looking action code, and I'm going to explain it. Firstly, we have a super variable called server, which allows us to say PHP Self, meaning that I want this page, the action should be this same page. All right. So inside of action, if we go back to our index page, we had success.php, which means move ahead and go to this page. I want, on this occasion, regardless of what this page is called, in this case, it's PHP, it's login.php, but the server PHP Self will just say reload this page and do the posting action on this page, which means that we have quite a bit of code to write. And that is actually very possible because we can actually reload the same page and do all the verifications that we did on the success.php. We can do it on the same page with the form and then take an action afterwards. So that's what we'll be doing with login. And because it will be reloading itself, that is why I have this block of text inside of the value section for username, where it's saying if the request method is post, meaning that if the page is loading because of a post action as opposed to me just clicking the link, then I want to reprint whatever username was entered. So that's why when you click submit, you may see the password section blank out. Notice password doesn't have that same code. So the password section will blank out, but your username or email address or whatever it is still in the text box waiting for you to enter the correct password. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here with this code. I just realized I didn't finish explaining the PHP Self. So we're posting back to the page with the PHP Self, but then you notice that this entire super variable is wrapped up inside of this function, HTML entities. And what HTML entities does is kind of strip the text that is going to be produced by this it strips it of any special characters and potentially malicious characters that would allow attackers to kind of inject whatever malicious code they could want. So this by itself has the PHP Self, the server PHP Self has some vulnerabilities that can be exploited. And PHP has given us this function to kind of reduce the possibility of that exploitation. All right, so now that we have a better understanding of all of this code, you can always just replay this and you can pause it and go ahead and rewrite your form. So whether you write it just like me or you have your own way of writing it, the key parts that I want are that you get the action section right, and well, the value section is actually optional, but make sure you get the action section right, as what we're about to do, this part is very vital. All right, so our next task is to check if the data was submitted via a form, post, request. So like I said, we could navigate to the page just by clicking login, or if I click the submit button, it will also reload. So you notice I click it, it's reloading the page. That's because of the PHP Self. So I need to check if it was a login button that was pressed or if I just navigated there. So this is another way of checking that. We did it in the index page where we checked is set. Where did we check? Sorry, in the success page. Right, sorry about that. So in the success page, we checked is set post submit. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is using our server super variable. So I'm actually just going to borrow this entire if statement, as it does a very similar thing, except it doesn't rely on the presence of that value. So this one relied on the fact that there's a post variable called submit coming over. If there was no submit, then this would have failed. However, this is far more generic, where it's saying, is there a post? I don't care about what variables may or may not be there. Was there a request method called post? And we already told it that the method is equal to post, which means once you click submit, it will trigger a post, and it's going to, the action is itself. So now we're checking, is it being loaded because the submit button was pressed? And then if it was, that means somebody was trying to log in, which means now we need to take some amount of action. So the first action I want to do is get the username, and I'm going to use two string manipulation functions there. So I'm using str to lower and trim. So what I'm doing is removing all white spaces from the username that is coming through the post, and then I'm making everything lowercase so that the chances of the username matching in the database are much higher when you kind of, manipulate it and massage it so it looks as clean as how you would have stored it in the database, right? And then that's being stored inside of username. And then we take the password, which we want to take exactly the way it was typed. So I'm not going to try to fix the password in any way, shape, or form, because this person should have typed the password the exact way that it was entered into the database the first time. Then I'm going to build a new password. All right, so I'm going to introduce a new variable. I'm calling it new password, and this looks very familiar. We're hashing the password and username combination like we did inside of our user.php. And the reason for this is that if we're about to check the database to see if the password is correct, then we can't be checking the database against the password that the person would have entered in the login form. All right, so if I go to the login form right now, I type in admin, I'm literally going to write in the word password because that's what I set my password as. However, we know in the database that the text password is not what is stored there. That is what is stored there. So whenever we're going to check, after I click login and I'm going to check the database, I need to make sure I'm checking the hash of whatever was entered against the hash of whatever is stored. You don't want to do it in reverse. You don't want to try and or unhash this, whichever word is correct. You don't want to decrypt the password and then try and check it against the plain text. You want to hash the plain text and then check it against what was stored. The two hashes should be equal, and only then you will know that this user exists. So having our new password, the next thing is that we want to call our user object All right. So user arrow, and then the function I want to call is get user. All right. So let me just make sure I'm making the right function call. So it's get user with the username and password. So in login, I'm calling get user with username and password, and it wouldn't be password, but it would be new password. All right, because the function doesn't care if it's getting the plain text or it's getting gibberish. It just wants to know that it got two parameters, one for the username and one for the password, and then it will go ahead and do its verifications where it checks to see if there's a username with that username and a password with that password, which would be the hashed password that we're passing in at this point. All right, so of course it's returning a result, so we need to say result is equal to there is whatever comes back after this function call. And then after we make that function call, we need to say if, and I'm just going to say if not result. So we went through this already. We can just check the negative first. So if not result, meaning it's going to return, well, it's going to return false if nothing, and well, result. So all right, I can probably modify this a bit. So if not result, then we want to echo a div with an error. So I'm just going to put echo div alert danger username or password is incorrect. Please try again. And then I'm going to say else. And my else is going to have me set up a session for the user. So the session is already created. We started the session when we said start session. Now what we need to do is set up variables inside of the session. So our session actually gives us some super variables that allow us to set values. So I can super variable session. All right, and you notice that all the super variables have that $ underscore and then all caps, just like the server, just like the post and the get, etc. But session allows me to dictate what subscripts I want. So I'm going to say username, session username is going to be equal to the value of whatever username was just authenticated. All right. So this is a part of the authentication. So it's the username that was verified rather. So it's verified that it's in the database and the correct password was provided. So now we can create a session with that username. So this session variable will allow us to store the username so that we don't have to go back to the database anytime we want the username, but we can just reference the session wherever we want in our code. All right. So we create one for the username, and I'm just going to create another one. Sorry. I'm going to create another one for the ID. So session ID is going to be equal to, and we just got back results, so I can actually just say result and look for the subscript ID and store that inside of that. So once again, our session variables are like a temporary holding area for anything that we want, and we can let them persist throughout user's session. All right. And then after we verify the user and we set up the session, the next thing we want to do is redirect our user from the login page. And so I'm going to say location, colon, and then my destination. Let's just say view records.php. All right. So once this user is verified and the session is created, then we can redirect them to the view records.php. All right, so now that we've done all of this work, let's see if our code, let's test our theory as we always do. So we have the login page, and the expectation is that when I type in admin and password, then click login, that we should be verified against the database and then redirected to our view records.php. So when I do that and click login, we get redirected. So it happens like lightning fast. You wouldn't even know that all of the code that we just wrote actually came into play. So what happened is when I clicked login, it reloaded itself, the page reloaded itself. And then at the top of the page, we're just saying, is it a post? Yes, it is. All right, get me the username, the password, hash the password. check if there's a user, and if there is, then we do all of this fanciness. So on the flip side, I'm going to go back to login, and I'm going to put in a user that doesn't exist. All right. And then when I click login, we see that the page, it loads. We get the alert saying username or password is incorrect, because we put in that if statement that if not result, meaning we didn't get back anything positive from this call, then we just want an alert that says username or password is incorrect. Generally speaking, you don't want to tell them which one is incorrect, because you don't want to solve half the puzzle for them, right? So we just give them that alert. And if you notice that the username value that was typed in remains inside of the text box, and that's because of what we did here with the value. If it is a post action, then reprint the username value that is there. All right. So that is part one of our battle solved. Now, another quick mod that we need to make is to change this login. So I have login, and if I'm logged in, this text doesn't change. So I want to contextually show the word login or the link to login versus hello username and a logout button. So I'm going to go back to my header.php file, and I actually started that process already where I have the login link. But what I'm going to do is wrap it around an if statement that is going to check to see if the session exists or not. All right. So we know how to check if something exists. Firstly, I'm going to fire up a little PHP block. All right. We know we need those for if statements. And then we say if, and we should know that to check if something exists or not. So I'm going to say not is set. All right. So I'm checking if the session does not exist. All right. So I'm going to say session super variable. And I have ID and I have username. So I know that my sessions that I'm creating inside of my login are username and ID. All right. So I can check against either one, because the only time these get created is when somebody has been verified in the database and gets passed along. All right. So in the header file, I'm just going to say if there is no session by the name of ID, and I'm going to qualify this a bit more. I shouldn't say ID. I'm going to say user ID. All right. So if there's no session by the name user ID or whatever you call your session, then I want to take an action. So I'm going to kind of butcher up this, this PHP code now. So this if statement is going to say, make the check. All right. And then I'm going to print my anchor tag. So if there is no session, I want to print the anchor tag, and then I have to close that. I have to open up another PHP block just to close that open brace. All right, so this closed brace matches this one, so that's just going to be wrapped up. So there are many ways you could do that. You could have just echoed this line by itself, that's fine. But then if you have quite a few anchor tags and so on, echoing them might get tedious. So that's why I didn't choose that route. So if the session does not exist, then display the login. And then I'm going to say else, and then open up another curly brace block, which I'm just going to close same time because I don't want to forget. All right, and put in the wrong. All right, so the else is going to happen between this PHP block and this PHP block. All right, so that's between line 38 and line 40 right now. What do we want to display? So once again, we're checking if the session does not exist, then we want to display the login. If it does exist, then I don't want to display the login button. Instead, I would probably display the anchor tag, and this one is going to say log out.php. So it's a logout anchor tag. All right. And I'm going to display some block of text, and I'm putting it in a span. So a span tag is a nice way to just inject some text somewhere. And I'm going to say hello And the username that I want is going to be stored inside of the session username. So remember that in login, we created a session variable with username. So instead of me having to go to the database every time after this to find out what the username is, I can just use this value to represent the username. So I'm just going to span hello and then put in a quick PHP. So that's a great thing about PHP blocks. You can just insert them almost anywhere. And I'm saying hello, and I'm going to echo whatever value is inside of the, the session username. And I'm just going to put an exclamation sign after this. So in other words, it should print hello, hello, admin, with an exclamation sign. All right, and all of that would be inside the span, and the span would be adjacent to the logout button. So we haven't created the logout page just yet, but let's see if that makes any difference. I'm just going to refresh. All right, I'm going to try and log in, admin, password, click login. All right, so we see that we're getting some amount of action. It's not elegant, but we see hello, we see admin, and we see a logout button. All right, so we can go back and style hello and admin, but I'm going to create the logout button first just to make sure that we have our bases covered. So I'm going to have login.php. I'm just going to create a new file, call it logouts.php. And I just went ahead and put in the code. So the logout.php is really a simple page. We don't need any header and footer and so on. So the cool thing is that we created that session.php. We have to include the session. All right, so I can just include it directly without having the header there. All right, and then I need to call the function that says session destroy. So we started session start, and then we have to destroy it. So it's ironic that we have to start the session, then destroy it. But the good thing is that once a session is started, if this is called a second time, we will know it was started. So that's why we have to call it here so it knows that, okay, a session is already in progress, and then it will destroy whatever session is in progress and then just relocate or redirect us to the index page. All right. So if I go ahead and click logout, then the expectation is that this entire section is going to say hello admin. Sorry, it's going to say login once again. And there we go. So login is restored, and we click login and we go ahead and put in a user that exists, admin password, login, and then we get a contextual menu. So that's a nice quick way to get up a contextual menu. And that menu will exist for every other page until we click logout. All right. All right, so back in the header file, I just made a quick change where I replicated that same anchor tag link. So instead of having a span for one side and then the anchor tag for another side, I just included the same anchor tag and I put that span text inside of that anchor tag. And then in the href, I just made it a hashtag. So it's a dead link. All right, so then when the menu loads, then we see it looks more sensible than it did before. All right, and even if we click it, nothing happens because it's a dead link, but logout still works. All right, so that concludes our second part of setting up our user authentication. After this, we're going to start actually clamping down on which pages require login and which ones don't.